I got the invitation to go on this Armed Lutheran radio show, though. You know this guy? Have you seen this? There's two things that I would like to say that make me feel safe. Number one, the fact that there is a radio show called the Armed Lutheran Podcast somewhere in the world. That makes me feel safer.
Pistols, prayer, and potluck. This is Armed Lutheran Radio.
Hi, folks. Welcome to Armed Lutheran Radio. I'm your host, Lloyd Bailey, the Armed Lutheran, and this is episode number 232. Thank you so much for making Armed Lutheran Radio a part of your week again this week. And for those of you who are new to the show, thank you for joining me today. Welcome aboard. You will soon see that we are not your typical pro-gun podcast. We're not your typical religion podcast either. We mix the two together. We discuss guns and hunting and competitive shooting and the natural right of self-defense, and most importantly, God's Word and what it has to say about the ethical and moral issues surrounding gun rights and gun ownership. Today, we've got a variety show for you. For those of you who are new, we change formats every week, and this week we have a little bit of everything that I mentioned before. Mia Anstein is our resident hunting guide. Sergeant Bill Sylvia is a masterclass competitive shooter, and Pastor John Bennett is here to pontificate on ethics and theology and culture. But before I turn the show over to them, I want to thank the awesome men and women who make this show possible, the members of what we call the Reformation Gun Club. This week, I want to give a special shout out to Sue and Eric and Turbo 1889, David, the disreputable Bartlett, Terry, Daniel, Dan, Dallas, Mark, and Catherine. Thank you all so much for your support. Thank you to all the men and women who are members of the Reformation Gun Club. Armed Lutheran Radio is listener-funded, and that means that we rely on the monthly and yearly contributions of our members. And for as little as $1 a month, you can join them and get access to hundreds of hours of exclusive content, invitations to our closed Facebook and MeWe groups, a chance to participate in our monthly online hangouts, and some cool Armed Lutheran swag. If you'd like to find out more, if you value what we do and would like to hear it continue, check out armedlutheran.us/gun club for all the details. That's armedlutheran.us/gun club, or look for a link in the show notes for this and any of our previous shows. Now, we talked last week, if you were with us in episode 231, Pastor Bennett and I were talking about the state of the nation. We were answering some questions from Amber in Virginia and Nathan right here in Texas, who both asked about the state of the nation with everything that was going on. And as we're watching the cities burning and the media fanning the flames, this past week, we saw more insanity out of Kenosha, Wisconsin, of all places, where police shot a black man multiple times in the back. Then in the resulting riots, 3 rioters were killed by a teenager with a rifle. Now, I'm not going to get into the facts of those cases, try to make any legal judgments. I'm not qualified to do that. But I do want to comment on, in this great political divide we have in the country right now, the biggest problem, I think, or one of the big problems that we have in dealing with that divide and the lack of unity is all sides have this desire to idolize and make martyrs out of the wrong people. What I saw going on this past week made me think of a segment that former contributor Aaron Israel made back in 2017 in our second season, where he talked about how we shouldn't be celebrating knuckleheads. And sadly, we haven't learned a lesson in the 3 years since, and the political divide in this country. Both sides are just continue to do this, celebrating what he called knuckleheads. Consider the most recent examples. Now, this isn't the absolute most recent. I'm going to go back to the beginning of all this craziness. Back in May, George Floyd. Now, George Floyd has been celebrated as a civil rights icon. He's been depicted in posters and murals. He's been heralded as a saint, as a martyr for civil rights, celebrated in nationally televised funerals, and buried in a gold-plated casket. And yet, George Floyd, in real life, was pretty much a scumbag. He was a drug user. He was an abuser. He was a felon with a lengthy rap sheet. He was a liar, a cheat, a thief. He spent years in prison for assault and robbery. He'd been convicted of crimes involving drugs and firearms. He was far from the paragon of virtue that he has been portrayed as. Now, that doesn't mean that his death at the hands of police wasn't tragic. It doesn't justify his death in any way. And if you remember, for a brief moment back in May, the entire country was united in outrage at his treatment at the hands of police. But now, rather than moving the needle forward on race relations, George Floyd's memory has become a joke. By making him out to be something that he wasn't, an innocent, cuddly man, upstanding and virtuous, who was killed for nothing else but passing a bad check, the unity that we had back in May has been destroyed. And the divide in this country has widened even further. By rioting and looting in George Floyd's memory, most Americans are a little more calloused about his death than they were back at the end of May. And now we have the most recent incident in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and the shooting of Jacob Blake, who was shot at the hands of white police officers, and that sparked a whole new wave of riots and looting. The media have portrayed Jacob Blake as a family man whose family and children are the most important thing in his life, and they've been crying a river at just how unjustly he was hassled by police and then shot in front of his children. Sports leagues and pro athletes have been wearing his name on their equipment, and they've been canceling games. And the truth is that Jacob Blake is a lowlife, wanted for domestic abuse, for assaulting women, for sexual assault. Okay, he is not a paragon of virtue. He has a history of abusing women and resisting police. Jacob Blake is not someone who is worthy of our respect. He is a stain on society. But that doesn't mean that he deserved to get shot. It doesn't mean that he should be killed by police. Now, instead of discussing whether the tactics used were proper, whether they were justified in shooting him 7 times in the back, we're burning cities down, and we're backing both sides of the political aisle into their respective corners, and nothing's getting done. The conduct of our public servants should be scrutinized carefully, and that scrutiny should be transparent, especially when those public servants are carrying guns and are authorized to use them against citizens. There's no position in the country that bears this level of power or, as a result, that level of responsibility. And every use of force should be examined carefully to determine if it was right or wrong. That process should be as transparent as possible. And if the officers were in the wrong, they should face some sort of justice or discipline. But unfortunately, we're constantly screaming about racism. Every time a black man dies at the hands or is shot at the hands of police, and it's distracting from the real issue, and that is government power. The issue is the authority and power of police. Once you scream racism, people tend to close their ears because they're tired of hearing it. People who are generally of good humor, good nature, good character, and who are not racists get a little tired of being called racist simply because of the color of their skin. That in itself is racism, and it turns people off. And other incidents that don't fit the black on white narrative, where police, it happens plenty of times where police kill white people in less than legal ways, those incidents don't seem to garner the same kind of interest from the media or the public. The problem is not racist cops. The problem is incompetent ones. And in any profession, you've got bad apples. The goal should be to try to make sure the bad apples don't get into the police force in the first place, or to weed them out as quickly as possible. And we can't do that if we're constantly screaming about racism that in these cases doesn't appear to exist. It's not racist police departments, It's corrupt and incompetent ones that we need to be worried about. It's the excessive use of force by agents of the state that we should be concerned about, whether that force is used against whites or blacks or Asians or Latinos. It shouldn't matter. But because we're constantly screaming about racism at every incident where a black criminal gets shot by police, we end up with riots. And because woke lefty politicians think that the lunatics who are screaming racism are going to turn on them if they actually do their jobs and uphold the law, well, citizens end up taking up arms to do what politicians refuse to do. And that brings us to the teenager that I mentioned earlier, the one who shot 3 rioters in Wisconsin. Now, after watching a whole summer of cities burning and businesses burglarized and plundered in fiery but mostly peaceful protests, some on the right have decided that enough is enough. People like the aforementioned teenager. They take up arms and they flock to Kenosha, Wisconsin to defend property that is not even theirs. And we've talked plenty of times on this show about how deadly and dangerous and wrong it is to use deadly force in defense of property. And while that teenager had every right to defend himself and defend his life after the mob chased him, threw things at him, hit him and tried to bludgeon him to death with a skateboard, and apparently fired shots at him, he put himself in that situation by bringing a gun across state lines from Illinois, of all places, in an attempt to defend property that was not his to defend in a state where he didn't even live. And we should not be making him out to be a martyr or a hero because his actions were reckless and stupid. And now 2 people are dead, 2 violent sex offenders, so there's not really any loss there, but people died because of his dumb decision to be a part of that situation that was going on in Kenosha, and because of a false narrative and politicians who don't have the spine to do their jobs and uphold the law. And now the media, I noticed today, are mourning the deaths of those 2 violent sex offenders and painting American gun owners in a negative light because of the stupidity of a 17-year-old kid from Illinois with a rifle. We are lionizing losers in this country, and that is a big part of the problem. It's part of why we will never have nice things when it comes to race relations or gun rights. And that's all I've got for today. That's what has been on my mind this week as I've watched events unfold. It's time to turn things over to my amazing cast, Mia, Sergeant Bill, and Pastor Bennett. Enjoy the rest of the show, sit back and relax, and I'll talk to you again next week.
Time now for Mia's Motivations with Mia Anstein.
Hey there, it's Mia here again. I hope you are all doing well. In the past few episodes, I've kind of been going over some statistics because this is a very unusual year, and I'm going to give you one last little tidbit of a statistic. And again, this is from the National Shooting Sports Foundation. They surveyed firearm retailers, and the retailers reported that 40% of this year's gun sales were conducted to buyers who had never previously owned a firearm. The NSSF tracks the background checks that are associated with firearm sales, and it's based on the FBI's National Instant Background Check System. And they looked at January through July of 2020, and of course, we already know it's a record, but the record is 12.1 million background checks. That's up 71.7%. Wow. I just wanted to share that last statistic with you. That percentage is up from 2019. This is an insane year. And while we're talking about it, I really want to talk to you kind of about where people get their start with firearms. And many gun owners, myself included, we know the saying, it all starts with a daisy. And that there is because we had daisy BB guns when we were kids. That's where you learned. So today I found a post on NRA Family, and it was about the Red Ryder BB guns. And so it led me to I want to talk to you guys about a great place to start before you actually buy a gun. With this many new gun owners, I hope that there are some new gun owners that are listening to Armed Lutheran Radio. And if you are new here, welcome. I'm glad that you're listening. There are such great things that we discuss around here. But today I want to talk to you about the Daisy BB gun and also why it's a really good place to start. Daisy is the most recognized name in air guns, and they're also the maker of the famous Red Ryder BB gun. And here in Pagosa Springs, where I live, we are home to the Red Ryder Roundup, and that's a rodeo that's here because Fred Harmon actually lived here in Pagosa Springs. And if you don't know who Fred Harmon is, he is the creator of the Red Ryder comic strip. And that was a comic book which was really popular in the 1930s. And that is precisely when the Red Ryder branded BB gun was introduced. I actually had a Red Ryder BB gun when I was a kid, and I just thought I was the Lone Ranger with my little lever action. And the traditional Daisy is a lever action. It has open sights. Just like that original Daisy model, the Red Ryder model, it has a steel barrel and it has a wood stock. The Red Ryder one has the Red Ryder artwork engraved on the stock, so it's pretty fancy. The Daisy BB gun, it's known by almost every gun enthusiast around the world, and even those who aren't, because we all know about A Christmas Story and how that poor little kid wanted a BB gun and Santa told him you might shoot your eye out. There's that history of the BB gun as well. So this BB gun, for first-time gun owners, it would be a great place to start because it shoots up to 350 feet per second. And that there, it is fast enough to shoot at targets and such, and maybe even kill some squirrels, something like that. But also, if you're just learning and you're just shooting at targets maybe attached to a fence or a tree or something like that, remember to wear your safety glasses because there is the possibility of a BB ricocheting and you just might shoot your eye out. So why shoot an air gun? The bottom line is that with the BB gun, and especially a Daisy BB gun, the lever action is just plain fun. I mean, it's part of the Wild West and cowboy thing. And the original Daisy BB guns had kind of a plastic lever, but they did evolve and they put a metal lever on there so that they're more durable. But this is an excellent way to help children and adults develop gun safety and handling skills. And those are so important. And that part there is why, if you haven't been around guns, it's a great place to start. The Red Ryder, it has a really large loop trigger guard, so even adults can fit their fingers in there. It has a button safety right behind the trigger, just like on a lot of long guns that are high-powered, high caliber. And that safety, it has the red ready to fire on there, so you can practice just like it's the real thing. It's important to know that the safety is there, but it's also important to know that the safety is a mechanism which can fail. We teach that in hunter education, but that's something that you need to know if you are a new gun owner. The Daisy BB gun, it has the look of a tubular magazine like an actual real rifle, but the real magazine in the BB gun is inside of the barrel. And that magazine can hold up to 650 4.5 millimeter steel BBs. So it can hold quite a bit, and it has a little peephole so you can kind of look in there to see if you're still loaded, if you have any more BBs in there, or if you're out. The BB guns are great for hunting, they're great for target practice, and they're really fun for competitions. And a competition is a great way, once you've got the basics down, it's a great way to hone your skills and really develop your muscle memory and reaction time, which would lead into a lot of what Sergeant Bill talks about in shooting competitions with firearms. So this is something with that BB gun, it's a great place to begin. The Red Ryder comes with open sights, and those I think are fabulous because they're such a great way to help youngsters and adults learn how to use the open sights. And this is something that I see all the time in hunter education class. Some kids come in and they know exactly what the sight is and how to line it up, and other kids don't have any idea, and it's because they weren't exposed to it when they were younger, and so they don't know. So it's just something that if you're wanting to learn, it's a great place to start. With the BB gun, you can kind of practice an up, a down, a side, and see where that shot's going to hit. The Red Ryder does come with an adjustable rear sight. It does only adjust for elevation, so it will adjust up and down, but not left to right. So if your shots are always going high, you can adjust that rear sight to bring them down a little to hit right where you want. For shooting competitions, it's so much fun because you can shoot, just try to do like a bullseye. You can get dartboard type targets where you keep a score. There's a lot of different game targets. You can also, if you don't have those, you can shoot aluminum cans, or you can get lollipops and put those into a board and try to shoot lollipops with them. Or a really fun challenge that a friend had at their place is they attached clothespins to a clothesline, and you just have them hanging down and you try to shoot them and make them spin. So that's kind of fun, and it's something that parents and children can do together and try to focus and develop responsibility. Daisy, I'm talking about adults and kids, but in this article that I shared from the NRA, and it's been about a year, but Daisy answered the call to adults. So they actually have an adult-sized Red Ryder BB gun. It's a model 1938 ARR, and so that's adult Red Ryder. This rifle is pretty much the same as the traditional Red Ryder, except the stock, the butt stock, is 2.35 inches longer in the adult version. That's the only thing that's really different. It allows you to get your cheek on the stock and get a good eye on that rear sight and be able to see your target. The adult version is available just by itself, and it comes by itself in a box set with the BB gun and safety glasses, or you can get it along with the youth BB gun and 2 sets of safety glasses if your family doesn't yet have the youth model. So that is something that you may be interested in, whether you're a new shooter or not. And before I go, I want to remind all of you, not just new shooters, but I want to remind you to always follow the 4 rules of firearm safety. So always treat your firearm as though it is loaded. Always keep your finger off the trigger and outside of the trigger guard until you are on target and ready to shoot. Always keep your muzzle pointed in a safe direction, and always know your target and what is beyond. On that note, you guys have a great one, and I will talk to you next time.
You can read more from Mia, watch her YouTube videos, or check out her podcast, Mac Outdoors with Mia and Leah, at miaanstein.com. Time now for another Ballistic Minute with Sergeant Bill Sylvia.
Hey everybody, I'm Sergeant Bill, and this is your Ballistic Minute. Today I want to talk to you about competitive shooting and how it can improve your concealed carry skills. Now, competitive shooting, whether it's IDPA or USPSA or even 3-gun, is going to allow you to see how you react under stress. So competition puts stress on you. And that stress may be just in the form of the timer, or trying to beat someone else, or the group of people that are there watching you shoot. But it's still going to add stress. It's not going to be quite the stress that you might have in a critical incident, but it still adds a lot more stress than just going to the range and plinking. Now, that added stress is going to manifest itself in everything that you do, your draws. If it's a concealed carry draw, you might fumble it. You might not get a good grip on the gun, even in a USPSA rig. Your reloads, that stress can cause you to miss a reload or fumble a magazine. That stress is also going to show you whether you actually manage your recoil while shooting under the stress of the timer and all the people watching. You'll find out how well or how bad you shoot under stress. Your practical accuracy will be readily apparent. Now, the best way to see all this is to get someone to videotape you. Use your cell phone and get some video. Get head-to-toe video of what you're doing, a little bit to the side so you can see it, even though they're going to be behind you. You can still see the manipulations. You can still see where you have the gun and how you're moving. And with that video, you'll be able to watch it over and over and over, even in slow-mo, and self-assess what needs improvement. Now, there's a big difference if you're going to be using your actual gear versus gamer gear. So if you're using your gamer gear, you've got USPSA stuff, and it's not really like the guns you use, or it's super light triggers, or any other major differences in your carry gun, then you're going to get a false sense of your abilities, because those gamer guns with a super light trigger and better sights and this and that, or tungsten guide rods or whatever you might have on your gamer gun that you don't have on your carry gun, is going to be a lot easier to shoot faster and more accurately. But if you're actually using your regular carry gear and you shoot some matches, you'll see your actual abilities. So if you want to shoot competition to try and improve your concealed carry skills, then you should probably shoot your concealed carry gear. At least shoot it every once in a while, so that you'll know what your actual skill level is, as opposed to what it is with your gamer guns and gear. So get out there and get some competition in, get some video of it, see how you're doing. You don't have to share the video with anybody. It's just for you to use as self-analysis. So get out there and try it and get better. See what you're doing and constantly practice and improve. I'm Sergeant Bill. This has been your Ballistic Minute.
Sergeant Bill Sylvia is a veteran of the Dallas Police Force and a masterclass competitive shooter. You can check out his YouTube videos at armedlutheran.us/Sergeant Bill. It's time for Pastoral Pontifications with Pastor John Bennett.
Welcome to another segment of Pastoral Pontifications. This is the Pistol Packing Padre, Pastor John Bennett. And today's topic was inspired by a conversation that my wife had with our son this past week. My son Benjamin, he's going to be 8 this coming October. And like most children his age, that he is just a sponge for information. So the question is, what are your children soaking up? And we could add to children, nieces, nephews, grandchildren, and the like. On one of the evenings this past week when my wife was putting our children to bed, unfortunately, I wasn't home. I had to be at a meeting. But as she was putting Benjamin to bed, he asked her the question, "Mommy, Black Lives Matter, right?" And of course, my wife, she was taken aback by this a bit. And she said, "Well, where did you hear that?" "Oh, I saw it on a yard sign when we were driving in town." We live, not too far from the city of Mankato, which in some ways it could be described as a liberal college town. And he had seen this sign. It had given him this idea that, yes, Black Lives Matter. And my wife, her response to him was, well, the lives of all people matter regardless of skin color. She didn't get too much into what Black Lives Matter stands for, what they believe, and so forth. But even something as innocuous as a yard sign had gained his curiosity and his attention. Now, I hadn't wanted at such a young age to inform my son that there are people in this world that use rather seemingly good slogans to promote a bad organization. And unfortunately, now I'm forced to do that. But this brought to mind what's being done in our country within the education system. Earlier this month, you might remember an activist teacher online expressing his concern that parents, especially conservative parents, posed a quote-unquote risk to teachers' work of indoctrinating children. There was also, and this is just within the past week, Rutherford County Schools in Rutherford County, Tennessee, sent out a letter to their parents. And in the letter, it said the following: RCS, Rutherford County Schools, strives to present these opportunities, speaking of online education, in a secure format that protects student privacy to the greatest extent possible. However, because these meetings will occur virtually, RCS is limited in its ability to fully control certain factors, such as non-student observers that may be present in the home of a student participating in a virtual meeting. RCS strongly discourages non-student observation of online meetings due to the potential of confidential information about a student being revealed. And then the form goes on to ask parents for their signature, and it warns that any violation of this agreement may result in RCS removing my child from the virtual meeting. So in other words, you can't be aware of what your child is being taught, and if you do make yourself aware, your child may be deprived of their education, which your tax dollars are paying for. Now, what is so infuriating about this is that there is not the assumption of privacy within public schools. The word public itself should imply that this is accessible to everyone. Parents have a right to know what their children are being taught. Now, here's the truth. There are forces at work in our world, primarily in the sphere of education and academia, secondarily through the media, whether that's the news or entertainment media, and these forces are intent on forming your child's mind against your will, impressing upon them the left's political agenda. And we as parents, we have a duty, a God-given obligation to make sure that we raise our children and impress upon them the ideals of conservatism, of objective morality, of the importance of our Second Amendment rights, and of course, most importantly, of the Christian faith. Now, I don't want to seem in this segment as if I am harping on public education. I don't want to give anyone that impression. But here's something that you need to understand, especially if your children are in public schools. You need to know what they are being taught in the classroom, whether that is face-to-face in the classroom or whether that is through a virtual education type of scenario. Now, I know it would be a pain in the butt. I'm glad I don't have to do this. But if your child's in public school, you need to ask them to bring home everything that they are being taught so that you can discuss it with them and refute any of the socialist or Marxist ideals that they may be being spoon-fed. Now, I realize that this isn't true for every public school or district or public school teacher. I happen to know some public school teachers who are politically conservative and devout Christians. But the chances are, if your children, or you could add to that your nieces and nephews and grandchildren, that if they attend a public school, there is a really good chance that your child is being taught ideas that are contrary to the Christian faith and opposed to liberty and conservatism. Now, I'm blessed to live in an area where parochial school is affordable and available. It's roughly $2,000 a year for kindergarten through 8th grade, and it's just under $6,000 a year for high school. And for me, that's affordable, having especially come from California, where you're looking at $10,000 a year. Fortunately, since my wife teaches at a parochial school, we don't pay anything for K through 8. It's included as part of her compensation package. But even if we had to pay that, we would certainly do it, because we would see it as investing in both our children's future and in their faith. If you can possibly afford it, I encourage you to consider the alternative. If you have the ability to provide your child with a Christ-centered education, do it. But if you can't, if there isn't a parochial school that is available in your area, or the cost is just beyond what you can afford, know that you need to be vigilant in knowing what your child is being taught, so that your child doesn't grow up to be one of these kids you see nowadays who are invading restaurants, telling people to raise their fists and say Black Lives Matter and calling them racists when they refuse to do it. Now, of course, I say that last part a bit tongue-in-cheek, but I've known a number of young people who were raised by politically conservative parents. But because their parents were oblivious to what their children were being taught, by the time child entered college, they had been transformed into a radical leftist activist. So to wrap this up with a few words of wisdom, know what your child is being taught, and make sure that they're not being indoctrinated and growing up to be a good little leftist. It's the last thing we need in this country. Well, that's all for this time. Christ's blessings to you all, and we'll talk to you again. If you have any questions or comments, if you didn't like anything I said, which is certainly within the realm of possibility, you can send any feedback to myself or to Lloyd through the feedback page at armedlutheran.us.
John Bennett is the pastor at St. John's Lutheran Church in Willow Creek, Minnesota. For more information, visit stjohnswillowcreek.org. For show notes, be sure to visit our website at www.armedlutheran.us. Check out the Facebook page, The Armed Lutheran, or join our Facebook group, Fans of Armed Lutheran Radio. If you like what you hear, please leave us a comment on our feedback page at armedlutheran.us/feedback or a review on iTunes and let us know what you think. Thank you for listening to Armed Lutheran Radio, a member of the Self-Defense Radio Network.